he lie. Everybody know he lie. But they be good lies though.
They do be good lies.
They
Like
be like
what?
great
The Tupac
lies.
picture.
That was one of the best.
The industry is there's a lot of snakes in it. Game was a snake that won.
For years, the game's been out here spinning stories that just don't line up. And the wildest part? It's not even the fans calling him out. It's the rappers themselves. From claiming he penned 50 Cent's What Up Gangsta to flexing a clearly photoshopped picture with Tupac, the drama never stops. But the real spark came from one of the game's boldest moves, saying he actually wrote part of 50 Cent's classic What Up Gangsta. If you really know hip-hop history, then you know just how wild that claim sounds. That track wasn't just some filler. It was the opening anthem on Get Rich or Die Tryin', the album that stamped 50 as dangerous, authentic, and untouchable in the rap game. So if you're gonna say you helped create that moment, you better be ready to drop proof.
Extravagant lies we've ever heard in our lives on this episode.
I'm with you.
When the question popped up in an interview, 50's reaction said everything. He didn't just deny it, he straight up laughed. His whole body language screamed, "Are you serious right now?" For 50, that record was his baby, his style, his pen, his raw aggression. Yeah, we didn't even know who he was. And the game wasn't the only one getting shut down. Tony Yayo jumped in too. Yayo, who was literally inside the studio when Get Rich or Die Tryin' was being crafted, didn't sugarcoat a thing. His clapback was sharp and clear. "You didn't write nothing." No room for confusion there. But this claim hit harder than just a simple denial. Because according to 50, not only did Game have nothing to do with What Up Gangsta, but his entire career might not have even existed without the backing of both 50 and Dr. Dre. Dre handpicked the beats, 50 laid down the hooks, and G-Unit sprinkled features all over the documentary. The entire blueprint was already locked in before Game even touched the booth. Just think about it. Hate It or Love It, and How We Do, two of Game's biggest hits, were originally 50 Cent records. They didn't just help him, they practically built him. Dre's golden ear, 50's pen, and that G-Unit cosign gave Game the credibility to break out of Compton and crash into the mainstream.
You
That's
photoshopped
not fair.
yourself on someone else and put a picture out with you and Pac.
It's Pac.
But it's not you. You heard him say Kanye did more for me in the last 2 weeks than Dr. Dre.
From West Side Story to Special, the formula was stamped. So when Game later tried to rewrite history, acting like he shaped 50's work or stood tall without those cosigns, it wasn't just revision, it was wild. It came off as pure disrespect, especially when you're talking about legends like 50 and Dre who guard their legacies with everything they've got. That's why Game's claims hit so hard. It wasn't just fans rolling their eyes, it was the very people who once stood beside him during his come-up, now shutting him down in public. The idea that Game was boosting his role didn't just cause friction, it sparked a bigger question. What else has he been lying about? And that question leads straight into one of the most infamous chapters of Game's mythology, the night he got shot. If the fallout with 50 made people suspicious, then Game's so-called survival story pushed doubts to a whole new level. For years, Game's been retelling the story of the night he got shot inside his own home. But the way it changes, it feels less like a memory and more like a Hollywood script. The core version goes like this. Back in 2001, Game was ambushed, hit with multiple shots, and left clinging to life. He claims he slipped into a coma, woke up days later, and then swore to dedicate himself fully to rap. On the surface, it's the kind of redemption arc hip-hop loves. The streets nearly take you out, but the music pulls you back. The problem? The details never line up. Sometimes he swears he was shot 5 times. Other times, the number magically changes. Sometimes he says 5 shots, other times it jumps to 7. In one version, he's left bleeding out on the floor for hours before anybody finds him. But in another, his brother rushes in almost instantly and saves the day. Even the length of the coma keeps shifting. 3 days in one retelling, several weeks in another. And here's the thing.
Said he wrote What Up Gangsta?
What Up Gangsta, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, bro. He wasn't even around when we did that. Like, that was before you even came into the picture. Like, that's Get Rich or Die Trying. He didn't even...
Coming to after that.
Yeah, we didn't even know.
Nobody doubts he really got shot. The hospital records and news reports back that up. But when the details keep changing, the story stops sounding like raw testimony and starts feeling like a staged performance. Naturally, fans began tearing apart all the contradictions, and soon the slip-ups got way too big to brush off. Just look at the infamous lyric that set everything off. "I woke up out the coma 2001. That's the line. But here's the issue. Doctor. Dre's album 2001 actually dropped in 1999. The math just doesn't work. And when your whole image is built on authenticity, cracks like that don't stay small. They blow up into major flaws. Even hip-hop voices like Joe Budden couldn't resist clowning him, pointing out how the timeline magically shifts every time Game tells it. To them, it wasn't about whether he really got shot. It was about whether he was exaggerating to make himself look like the West Coast's answer to 50 Cent's 9-shot story. And that's the real problem here. When your personal story becomes your whole brand, every little inconsistency makes people question everything else you've ever said. By this point, Game already had 2 big strikes on his credibility. First, inflating his role in 50's success, and second, twisting the details of his so-called near-death experience. But here's the kicker. Neither of those slip-ups compare to what came next. Because years later, word on the street was that Game didn't just bend the truth about himself. He turned around and took shots at the very man who gave him a career in the first place, Dr. Dre. By then, Game had already been grilled about his origin story, his shooting, and even the Kanye and Dre connections. You'd think he would have been more careful with what he said, but what came next shocked the hip-hop world in one of the most controversial ways ever.
That word was music that I made with Dre, not with Game with me. How We Do, Hate It or Love It, Church for Thugs, Special, Higher, West Side Story.
One of the most unforgivable statements Game ever made came at the expense of his own mentor, Dr. Dre, and it all started with an unexpected comparison to Kanye West. In a moment that spread like wildfire across interviews and social media, Game claimed, "It's crazy that Ye did more for me in the last 2 weeks than Dre did for me my whole career." For fans and industry insiders, that wasn't just another wild Game quote. It felt like straight-up betrayal, because whether you buy every detail or not, one fact is undeniable. Dr. Dre was the architect of Game's career from day one. Let's not forget, Dre signed Game to Aftermath in 2003, gave him the beats, the mentorship, and most importantly, the placement that catapulted him forward. With Jimmy Iovine in the mix, Dre was the one who aligned him with 50 and G Unit, a move that guaranteed mainstream shine. The result? The documentary, a 5 times platinum album.
Same time Dre dropped 2001. Game lyric, right?
Yeah, that was a lyric.
Are you about to tell me
Wait.
that 2001 didn't come out in 2001?
It did not.
Came out in 90.
Grammy nods, and a cemented spot in rap history. None of that would have happened without Dre's backing. That's why the hip-hop world reacted instantly when Game made that statement. Tony Yayo, for one, didn't bite his tongue. He reminded Game, "You have a career because of Dr. Dre, you even said on record, 'What the F am I without a doctor?' Dre track? So what are you talking about?" To Yayo and countless fans, Game's comment wasn't just reckless, it was flat out ungrateful. But the question is, why would he even say it? Some point to the lingering tension around the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show, where Dr., Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, and yes, even 50 Cent all lit up the stage for one of the most iconic hip-hop performances ever, without Game anywhere in sight. But Game, he was nowhere to be found. At first, he brushed it off, acting like he wasn't bothered. But later, the truth slipped out. On podcasts and interviews, he admitted the Super Bowl snub stung bad, leaving him feeling abandoned by both Dre and 50. To some, that Kanye did more for me comment wasn't really about facts. It was about hurt spilling over. Still, the damage was already done. Even when Game tried to walk it back, blaming alcohol or saying he still saw Dre as a blessing, the moment had already left a scar. Sure, he admitted Dre did things nobody else could have done for his career. Sure, he admitted he should have shown more grace.
He's hurt. See, in hip hop, we very rarely do we look past the surface.
But in hip hop, once you disrespect a legend, especially your own mentor, those words don't vanish. What many called hurt speaking just became another crack in Game's shaky credibility. First, it was 50 Cent. Then it was the shooting story. Now, it was Dre. Each controversy chipped away at Game's image, and instead of looking like a survivor, he started looking like a man rewriting his own past. And as if that wasn't enough, his next move made things even worse. Trying to keep himself tied to West Coast royalty, Game leaned on Tupac's legacy, but the way he did it completely backfired. A photoshopped picture of him standing with Tupac started making the rounds online. At first glance, some people thought it was real, a never-before-seen shot of Pac shoulder to shoulder with the Compton rapper. And if it had been genuine, it would have stamped Game as an heir to Pac's legacy without question. But the internet moves quick, and it didn't take long for fans to start zooming in. The shadows looked off, Pac's chain looked copy-pasted, and the proportions just didn't add up. Within hours, the photo was exposed as fake. "It's Pac, but it's not you," one fan joked, and what was meant as a tribute instantly flipped into a meme. Blogs roasted it, message boards lit up, and people accused Game of trying way too hard. Instead of looking like Pac's natural successor, he came off like someone desperately forcing the comparison. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Game had just fallen out with Dre and was already losing credibility across the industry. That Photoshop was supposed to send a message: I'm still part of this West Coast legacy. But instead, it turned into proof that his spot wasn't as secure as he wanted people to think.
You
That's
photoshopped
not fair.
yourself on someone else and put a picture out with you and Pac.
It's Pac.
But it's not you.
Even Pac's fans, who usually embraced tributes and references, spoke out with disappointment. To them, Tupac wasn't just an icon. He was sacred. Manipulating his image, even with good intentions, felt like exploitation. If Pac was alive, he wouldn't need Photoshop, one fan wrote online. And that single line summed up the backlash perfectly. Real recognizes real, and this move didn't feel real at all. But here's the twist. Not every move Game made was about lies or beef. Some moves weren't just about beef. They were about something deeper, clinging to relevance. That chase pushed Game out of Dre's shadow, past the ghost of Tupac, and straight into the orbit of two massive names in rap history, Kendrick Lamar and Eminem. And with Game, feuds are never just background noise. They've defined his entire career. Beyond the infamous clashes with 50 Cent and Dr. Dre, there's a bigger pattern here. A man constantly fighting to stay relevant, often at the cost of his own credibility. Nowhere is this clearer than with Kendrick and M. Kendrick, for instance, started off showing nothing but respect on Black Boy Fly, giving Game a salute while also describing how he watched Snoop Dogg pass the torch to him, a symbolic moment for the new West Coast generation. They collaborated on tracks, shared stages, and for a while, it looked like Game had locked in as the bridge between eras. But the problem? Game's rarely satisfied with just respect. Even with Kendrick showing him admiration, whispers started floating that Game was downplaying Kendrick's skills, whether out of competitiveness, jealousy, or just a need to keep his own name buzzing in the spotlight. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because the same cycle played out with Eminem. At first, Game couldn't praise M enough, calling him the only rapper nobody ever wants a problem with, and even admitting, "I used to think Eminem was better than me."
$4,000 for a verse. So I made a beat for him to rap over, and he was going to record a verse and then send it back to me for $4,000. I thought it was legit because I previously paid him to post one of my new songs.
But years later, he flipped the script, challenging Eminem to a versus, brushing off his relevance, and dropping disses that felt less like real beef and more like a publicity stunt to grab attention. This pattern, admiration turning into confrontation, respect flipping into rivalry, is at the core of Game's story with Kendrick. It really surfaced during the Kendrick versus Drake feud, when Game threw his full support behind Drake, calling him his brother, while skipping a West Coast unity show hosted by Kendrick. With Eminem, it was the same play, trying to bait one of hip-hop's most untouchable figures into a battle that never actually happened, but the result in both cases was the same. Game ended up on the outside, looking in. So when Kendrick hit the stage at the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show with Dre, Snoop, and Eminem, Game was nowhere in sight, left out once again. Game even admitted it stung, going as far as calling Kendrick a safe pick. And when he dissed Eminem, thinking the internet would explode with attention, M's response was pure silence. M brushed it off on Instagram Live while fans clowned Game for trying way too hard. And now, more and more people are pointing out a pattern. Game takes respect and flips it into rivalry. He stirs up controversy just to keep his name alive. Sometimes it works, sometimes it backfires. But every single time, it feeds the same image. A talented rapper whose biggest battles come from his own need to prove he still matters. And this is where the story takes another twist. Game getting called out by a rapper named Spar. Spar claimed he paid for a feature but never got what was promised, and he wasn't the only one. A fan even commented, "Game charging $4,000 for a verse? Bro is down bad." To some, this wasn't the same Game who once stood tall as a West Coast hero. It was a different picture entirely. An artist hustling, not for the culture, but just to survive. The accusations started piling up, and with each new claim, the gap between his glory days and his current reality grew even wider. Whether you see it as business moves or flat-out desperation, one thing was clear. The legend who once symbolized Compton pride was now being questioned in ways fans never thought they'd see. But let's switch gears for a second. Controversy wasn't the only thing making people doubt Game's legacy. There was something else lurking. Something that had been there from the very start. After the $4,000 controversy, the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. First, it was credibility, then loyalty, now reputation. And just when it seemed like Game might finally regroup, another habit came under the spotlight, one that had always been there, but was now drawing sharper criticism: name dropping. And here's where it gets wild. Game publicly claimed he doesn't need to name drop, but that's exactly what he's known for. Over the years, he built a rep for constantly dropping names of heavyweights like Dr., Dre, 50 Cent, Eminem, and more. At first, it felt like respect, a hungry kid from Compton paying homage to the giants who inspired him, but with time, that respect turned into a never-ending pattern and eventually a punchline. Fans noticed, rappers noticed, memes started circulating, and jokes spread. Instead of standing tall as his own legend, Game became known as the guy who couldn't stop name dropping. Game started looking like he was leaning on the weight of other people's names just to stay relevant, and that's when the vibe shifted. Fans began saying it wasn't about lyrical skill anymore. It was about identity. Was he truly carving his own lane, or forever stuck in the shadows of others? What started out as homage slowly turned into habit, and what began as respect eventually invited ridicule. His shoutouts weren't just casual nods anymore. They became part of the story he was building, shaping how people saw him and, at times, how they judged him. From this point on, every story, every claim, every controversy stacked another layer onto the public's view of Game. From Dre to 50, from Pac to M, contradictions and debates always seemed to follow, leaving fans and peers to question what was real and what was just embellishment. The more Game talked, the more scrutiny followed. Every line dissected, every boast weighed against his history and actions. It all forced people to ask, where does fact end and fabrication begin? And that leads to the real question. Will Game's legacy be remembered for his undeniable talent or for the wild narratives he built around it? His career is both, a mix of raw skill, influence, and messy storytelling that created a legacy still debated to this day. A legacy full of contradictions, where truth and myth crash into each other, leaving fans constantly guessing, arguing, and fascinated by the man behind the music. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. There's plenty more heat coming your way.